The golden rays of sunset painted the dusty street of Hollow Creek as Rebecca Ellington stumbled from the back of a covered wagon, her wrists raw from the ropes that had bound them for days. The year was 1875, and in this forgotten corner of Arizona territory, the law was whatever men with guns decided it was. "Stand up straight, girl," growled Silas Turner, a man whose tobacco-stained beard couldn't hide the cruelty in his smile. He yanked Rebecca forward by the chain attached to the iron collar around her neck. Merchandise needs to look presentable. Rebecca's once fine blue dress was torn and dirt-stained, her auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. 22 years of life hadn't prepared her for this moment, being paraded toward the auction block outside the Broken Spoke Saloon. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the daughter of a respected Boston physician. Now, her father lay buried in an unmarked grave along the trail west, killed by the same bandits who had captured her and decided she'd fetch a good price in the territories. "Got a fine specimen here, gentlemen," Turner called out to the gathering crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters. "Educated Eastern lady, knows her letters and numbers. Plays the piano too. Imagine having such refinement in your home." Rebecca kept her gaze fixed on the ground, refusing to let these men see her tears. She'd cried enough during the journey west. Now survival was all that mattered. "This ain't right, Turner," a voice called from the crowd. "We don't trade in people in Hollow Creek." "Shut your mouth, Sanders," Turner spat. "This ain't no different than selling horses. She's property, fair and square." $200, came a slurred call from a red-faced man reeking of whiskey. $300, shouted another, a silver-haired rancher with cold eyes. Rebecca felt her stomach turn as the bidding continued. These men were discussing her as if she were livestock, their eyes assessing her worth based on her physical attributes. $500, called a new voice, deep and steady. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward. He wore a faded denim coat over a cotton shirt, trail-worn boots, and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. When he tilted his head up, Rebecca saw a face weathered by sun and wind, but with eyes as clear and sharp as a mountain lake. "Well now," Turner grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Looks like we got ourselves a serious buyer. The gentleman in the back offers $500. "I'm not bidding," the man said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. He reached up and adjusted his hat, revealing more of his face, strong features framed by dark hair and a short beard with hints of copper. "I'm telling you this ends now." Turner's hand moved toward the pistol on his hip. "This ain't your concern, mister." "The name's Gabriel Hunt," the man said, stepping closer, "and I'm making it my concern." Rebecca watched as he approached, his steady gait betraying no fear despite being outnumbered. There was something in his posture that spoke of quiet confidence, a man accustomed to danger. "This woman is being sold against her will," Gabriel continued, his voice carrying to the edges of the crowd. "She's no one's property." Turner laughed, a harsh sound like stones grinding. "She's mine to sell. I got her fair, and there's nothing fair about kidnapping," Gabriel interrupted. His right hand hadn't moved toward his holstered revolver, but something in his stance suggested he wouldn't need to draw first to win. "And there's nothing square about selling human beings." "The law," Turner began, "ain't here," Gabriel finished for him, "but I am. And in this territory, stealing women and selling them is still a hanging offense." A tension settled over the street, thick as summer heat. Rebecca held her breath, aware that her fate hung in the balance of the next few moments. Sheriff Morris Patton finally pushed through the crowd, his silver badge catching the last light of day. "What's going on here, Turner?" "Just conducting business, Sheriff," Turner replied, his voice less certain now. "He's selling this woman like she's livestock," Gabriel said before Turner could continue. "Claims he acquired her legitimately." Sheriff Patton looked at Rebecca, then at the iron collar around her neck, his weathered face hardened. "That true, miss?" Finding her voice at last, Rebecca spoke, her Eastern accent stark against the frontier drawls. My name is Rebecca Ellington. My father and I were traveling to San Francisco when our stagecoach was attacked. They murdered him and took me captive 3 weeks ago." The sheriff's hand moved to rest on his pistol. "Turner, you're under arrest for kidnapping and attempted human trafficking." "You can't," Turner began, his hand darting toward his gun. The shot that rang out didn't come from the sheriff or from Gabriel. Instead, one of Turner's own men had fired at Gabriel. The bullet missed its mark, splintering the wooden post beside him. What followed was chaos. Gabriel shoved Rebecca behind him as he drew and fired in one fluid motion. Turner's accomplice collapsed with a hole in his shoulder. The sheriff's gun was out now too, aimed squarely at Turner. "Drop it," Patton ordered as Turner's fingers hovered near his holstered revolver. For a moment it seemed Turner might risk it all. Then, seeing the odds against him, he raised his hands in surrender. "Get these men locked up," the sheriff ordered his deputy. "And someone get that collar off the lady." As the crowd dispersed and Turner was led away cursing, Gabriel turned to Rebecca. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Are you hurt, Miss Ellington?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Nothing that won't heal," she answered, though her wrists burned from the rope burns and her spirit felt crushed beneath the weight of all she'd lost. A blacksmith was called to remove the iron collar. The metal gave way with a final snap that seemed to echo Rebecca's transition from captive to free woman. She rubbed her neck, feeling naked without the weight that had become so hatefully familiar. "You saved my life," Rebecca said to Gabriel as they stood outside the sheriff's office. "How can I ever repay you?" Gabriel shook his head. "No debt between us. Some things a person does because they're right, not for payment. Still, I owe you my gratitude at the very least." She hesitated, suddenly aware of her circumstances. I have nowhere to go. My father was all the family I had and our belongings were stolen." The sheriff, overhearing this, stepped forward. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house might have a room. She sometimes takes in women in difficult circumstances." "I'll cover her board," Gabriel said quietly. When Rebecca began to protest, he added, "Consider it an advance. The Henderson ranch where I work needs a school teacher for the Hands children and those from nearby homesteads. The position comes with room and board once the schoolhouse is finished." Rebecca felt a flutter of hope for the first time in weeks. I was training to be a teacher before we left Boston." "Then it seems Providence has brought you to Hollow Creek, Miss Ellington," Gabriel said with a small smile, "though I wish the journey had been kinder." As they walked toward the boarding house in the gathering darkness, Rebecca realized that despite everything she'd lost, she had somehow found something unexpected on this frontier, the chance to begin again. And a man whose principles shone as bright as the stars now appearing in the Arizona sky. The boarding house run by Martha Henderson stood at the edge of town, a 2-story wooden structure with a neat porch and curtained windows that glowed with warm light. As Gabriel escorted Rebecca up the steps, the door opened before they could knock. "Heard there was trouble at the auction block," said the gray-haired woman who appeared in the doorway. Her sharp eyes took in Rebecca's disheveled appearance and the marks on her neck where the collar had been. "This the girl, then, Mrs. Henderson? This is Miss Rebecca Ellington," Gabriel said, removing his hat. "She's in need of lodging." Martha Henderson's stern expression softened. "Come in, child. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." The interior of the boarding house was modest but immaculately clean. A stew bubbled in a pot on the kitchen stove, its aroma making Rebecca's stomach clench painfully. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything other than hardtack and jerky. "Mr. Hunt has offered to pay for my board," Rebecca explained, embarrassed by her dependence. "Until I can begin work as a teacher." "Teacher, is it?" Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow as she ladled stew into a bowl. "We could use more education in these parts. Too many can't read more than their own names, if that." Gabriel remained by the door, hat in hands. "I should leave you to rest, Miss Ellington. I'll return tomorrow to discuss the teaching position in more detail." Rebecca felt a sudden panic at his departure. Irrational as it was, Gabriel Hunt represented safety in this unfamiliar world. Thank you again, Mr. Hunt. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't intervened. Something flickered across his face, anger perhaps, at the situation she'd endured. No need to dwell on what didn't come to pass. Get some rest. After he departed, Mrs. Henderson showed Rebecca to a small but clean room on the second floor. Baths down the hall. I'll bring up hot water and some clean clothes. They'll be large on you, but they're better than what you're wearing. Left alone, Rebecca finally allowed herself to collapse onto the narrow bed. The tears came then, silent but uncontrollable. She wept for her father, for the life she'd lost, for the indignity she'd suffered, and for the uncertain future that lay ahead. When Mrs. Henderson returned with steaming water and folded garments, she said nothing about Rebecca's red-rimmed eyes. Instead, she helped the younger woman wash away the grime of captivity, gently tending to the abrasions on her wrists and neck. Those will heal, the older woman said pragmatically. The rest takes time, but it heals too in its way. Did you know Mr. Hunt before today? Rebecca asked as she changed into the borrowed nightgown. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Gabriel's been foreman at the Henderson Ranch, my late husband's brother's place, for 3 years now. He's a good man. Doesn't talk much about his past, but he treats people fair and stands by his word. He risked his life for a stranger today. That's his way, Mrs. Henderson replied simply. Now eat your stew and get some sleep. Tomorrow will come soon enough. The next morning, Rebecca awoke to sunshine streaming through curtains, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed in the clothes Mrs. Henderson had provided, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that hung loosely on her frame. After weeks of captivity, she had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Henderson teaching a young girl how to roll biscuit dough. This is my granddaughter, Emma, the older woman explained. Emma, this is Miss Ellington. She's going to be the new teacher. The child looked up with curious eyes. Can you really play the piano like they said in town? Rebecca felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I can. My mother taught me before she passed. There's an old piano at the church, Emma said excitedly. Nobody knows how to play it proper. Breakfast consisted of biscuits, eggs, and strong coffee. Rebecca ate slowly, savoring each bite after so long without proper nourishment. As she finished her second cup of coffee, there was a knock at the door. Gabriel Hunt stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking more rested than he had the previous evening. He wore a clean shirt and his hair was damp, as if freshly washed. Good morning, Miss Ellington, he said. I trust you slept well. Better than I have in weeks, Mr. Hunt, she answered truthfully. If you're feeling up to it, I thought we might ride out to see the schoolhouse. It's nearly finished, and you should know what you're agreeing to before you accept the position. Rebecca hesitated. I don't have proper riding clothes. The buckboard's outside, he clarified, and I've brought something for you. He handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. From the general store, nothing fancy but proper sizes at least. Inside the package, Rebecca found a serviceable dress of blue cotton, undergarments, a shawl, and sturdy boots. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. This is too much, she protested. It's a necessity, not charity, Gabriel replied. Consider it part of your employment. I'll wait outside while you change. The new clothes fit well enough, and Rebecca felt almost like herself again as she stepped outside to where Gabriel waited with the wagon. He offered his hand to help her up to the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they left town behind, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands dotted with scrub and occasional stands of trees along creek beds. In the distance, mountains rose purple against the sky. It's beautiful, Rebecca said softly, different from anything I've known. Arizona territory has its own kind of beauty, Gabriel agreed. Harsh sometimes, but honest. The land doesn't lie to you about what it is. Unlike people, she murmured. He glanced at her. You were headed to San Francisco. My father accepted a position at a hospital there. After my mother died 2 years ago, there was nothing keeping us in Boston." She looked down at her hands. "He was a good man, my father, a healer. He didn't deserve to die in the dust." "Few deserve the ends they meet," Gabriel said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." They rode in companionable silence for a while. Rebecca found it strangely comforting there was no expectation for her to fill the quiet with chatter as there had been in Boston society. "Were you born out here?" she asked eventually. Gabriel shook his head. "Pennsylvania originally, came west after the war." The brief answer hinted at deeper stories, but Rebecca didn't press. Everyone in this new land seemed to be carrying pieces of a past they'd rather not discuss. After about an hour's travel, they crested a low hill and the Henderson Ranch came into view. The main house was substantial, built of timber with a broad porch. Outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. "The ranch runs 5,000 head of cattle," Gabriel explained. "James Henderson built it up from nothing 20 years ago. His widow Sarah runs it now, with their son Thomas learning the business." Near the ranch, but set apart on its own small rise, stood a newly constructed building. The schoolhouse was simple but well made, with large windows and a small bell tower. "It's not finished inside yet," Gabriel said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but there'll be desks and a blackboard before winter comes. 20 children from the ranch and neighboring homesteads will attend." As they approached the schoolhouse, Rebecca noticed a figure working on the roof. The man waved when he spotted them. "That's Caleb, the ranch carpenter," Gabriel explained. "He's been working on this place for months now." Inside, the schoolhouse smelled of fresh cut wood and paint. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the empty space that would soon hold desks and eager young minds. "What do you think?" Gabriel asked, watching her expression carefully. Rebecca turned slowly, taking it all in. After everything she'd lost, here was something unexpected, a purpose, a place, a future. "It's perfect, Mr. Hunt," Gabriel, he corrected gently. "If you're going to be living on the ranch, we might as well use given names." "Gabriel," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you must call me Rebecca." A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. "Rebecca it is." From the schoolhouse, they continued to the main ranch house, where Rebecca was introduced to Sarah Henderson, a formidable woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So you're the teacher Gabriel found," she said, assessing Rebecca with a glance. "You look like you could blow away in a strong wind. Martha feeding you properly?" "Yes, madam," Rebecca replied. "Mrs. Henderson has been very kind, good. We need someone with education out here. These children deserve more than just knowing how to brand cattle and mend fences." She gestured for them to sit at the large kitchen table. "The position comes with room and board here at the ranch once the teachers' quarters are finished. Until then, you'll stay in town." "When would I begin?" "The schoolhouse should be ready in 2 weeks," Gabriel answered. "That gives you time to recover your strength and prepare." Sarah Henderson placed cups of coffee before them. "You've had a hard journey from what I hear. If you need more time, we can wait." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. 2 weeks is plenty, Mrs. Henderson. I'm eager to begin." Something like approval flickered in the older woman's eyes. "Good, we don't coddle ourselves out here, even when we've faced hardship." As they toured the rest of the ranch, the bunkhouse where the cowboys lived, the corrals where horses were trained, the garden that supplied the kitchen, Rebecca began to understand the ordered world Gabriel inhabited. Every person had a purpose, a role to fulfill. There was a reassuring solidity to it all. "The men respect him," Sarah commented as they watched Gabriel speaking with 2 cowboys across the yard. "He's fair but firm, doesn't ask anything of them he wouldn't do himself." "How did he come to work here?" Rebecca asked. Sarah sipped her coffee. "Rode in 4 years ago looking for work. My husband recognized quality when he saw it, made him foreman within a year." She gave Rebecca a sidelong glance. "He doesn't speak of his past much, but I know he fought for the Union. Carries a bullet somewhere near his heart that the doctors couldn't take out." Rebecca watched Gabriel demonstrate something to the younger cowboys, his movements efficient and sure. "He saved my life," she said softly. "I owe him everything." "Gabriel wouldn't see it that way," Sarah replied. "That man doesn't keep ledgers of debts and payments when it comes to doing what's right." On the return journey to town, Rebecca felt a growing sense of hope replacing the despair that had been her companion for weeks. The landscape no longer seemed alien and threatening, but full of possibility. "Thank you," she said as they neared Hollow Creek. "Not just for yesterday, but for today, for giving me a future when I thought mine was lost." Gabriel kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Every person deserves the chance to write their own story, Rebecca. Yours was interrupted, not ended." As they pulled up to the boarding house, Rebecca noticed a commotion down the street. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. "Wait here," Gabriel said, his expression darkening. He jumped down from the wagon and strode toward the disturbance. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before following. As she approached, she could hear angry voices. "Lynch the kidnappers," someone shouted. "Make an example." Sheriff Patton stood on the steps of his office, hands raised for calm. "We'll have a proper trial when the circuit judge arrives next month." "That's how justice works. They wouldn't have gotten a trial if they'd sold the lady." Another voice called out. Rebecca pushed through to the front of the crowd just as Gabriel reached the sheriff. Their eyes met briefly before Gabriel turned to address the crowd. "Listen to the sheriff," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "If we abandon the law when it's inconvenient, we're no better than the men inside those cells." "Easy for you to say, Hunt," someone shouted. "It wasn't your neck in an iron collar." All eyes turned to Rebecca as she stepped forward. For a moment, she felt the weight of their attention like a physical burden. Then she lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "No, it was mine," she said. "And if anyone has the right to demand swift justice, it would be me. But I stand with Mr. Hunt and Sheriff Patton. Let the law take its course." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rebecca could feel Gabriel watching her, his expression unreadable. "Go home," Sheriff Patton told the crowd. "There'll be no lynching in Hollow Creek today or any day." Slowly the crowd dispersed, though many cast backward glances at Rebecca. Gabriel approached her, concern evident in his eyes. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said quietly. "I couldn't stand by while a mob formed because of me," she replied. "It wasn't because of you. It was because of what those men did." He helped her back into the wagon. "But you showed courage back there. Not everyone would speak for the law after suffering at those men's hands." As they continued to the boarding house, Rebecca felt something shifting between them, a respect that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Perhaps, she thought, this was the beginning of friendship. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rebecca divided her time between recovering her strength, planning lessons, and learning about her new home. Each morning, she walked through town, familiarizing herself with Hollow Creek and its inhabitants. The general store owner, Mr. Finley, donated primers and slates for students who couldn't afford them. The blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Rivers, offered to sew curtains for the schoolhouse windows. Even Sheriff Patton contributed, promising to visit the school monthly to teach the children about law and citizenship. Every few days, Gabriel rode into town with updates on the schoolhouse progress. Sometimes they would sit on the boarding house porch in the evening, talking of books they'd read or places they'd seen. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. "Were you always a rancher?" she asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the western sky. Gabriel smiled faintly. "No, before the war I studied law at the University of Pennsylvania." This surprised her. A lawyer becoming a cowboy, that's an unusual path. "The war changed many paths," he said simply. "Afterward, I couldn't bear to be in courtrooms arguing over property lines when I'd seen men die over much larger principles." Rebecca understood that feeling, how great trauma could make the ordinary concerns of life seem trivial. "So you came west." "I drifted for a while." Worked cattle drives, tried mining, even scouted for the army briefly. He looked out at the darkening landscape. The Henderson Ranch was the first place that felt like it could be home. And now, does it feel like home? Something flickered in his eyes. Most days. The evening before Rebecca was due to move to the ranch, a letter arrived from San Francisco. It was from her father's colleague, Dr. Lawrence, expressing condolences for her father's death and offering assistance should she continue to San Francisco. "You could still go, Mrs. Henderson said when Rebecca shared the contents of the letter. "Start the life you and your father planned." Rebecca folded the letter carefully. "That life died with my father. I'm building a new one here." The following morning, Gabriel arrived with the wagon to transport Rebecca and her few belongings to the ranch. In addition to the clothes he'd purchased, she now had books donated by townspeople, teaching materials, and a journal given to her by Mrs. Henderson. "The ranch hands have a surprise for you," Gabriel said as they traveled. "They've been working on it in their spare time." When they arrived at the schoolhouse, Rebecca was amazed to find it transformed. The interior was now furnished with rows of simple but sturdy desks. A teacher's desk stood at the front, and beside it, something covered with a canvas tarp. "What's this?" she asked as several cowboys removed their hats and shuffled their feet. "Go ahead and look," Gabriel encouraged. Rebecca pulled back the tarp to reveal a small piano, old but well-polished. She gasped in surprise, running her fingers over the keys. "It belonged to Mrs. Henderson's niece who passed last winter," one of the cowboys explained. "She said you should have it for the school." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes. "Thank you, this is wonderful." She sat on the bench and played a simple melody, the notes floating through the schoolhouse. When she looked up, she caught Gabriel watching her, an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher. The teachers' quarters attached to the schoolhouse were simple but comfortable: a bedroom, a small sitting room with a stove, and basic furniture. It was more than Rebecca had dared hope for after her ordeal. That evening, she was invited to dinner at the main house with the Henderson family. Thomas Henderson, Sarah's son, was a serious young man of 25, clearly devoted to the ranch and his mother. His wife Lily was expecting their first child, and the conversation often turned to the future. "You'll have another student in a few years," Lily said with a smile, her hand resting on her rounded belly. As the evening drew to a close, Gabriel offered to walk Rebecca back to her new home. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky in greater profusion than she'd ever seen in Boston. "It's like diamonds on black velvet," she murmured, gazing upward. "One thing we have plenty of out here is sky," Gabriel replied. "Sometimes it's the only thing that reminds you how small your troubles really are." At her door, he hesitated. "Will you be all right here?" "It's more solitary than the boarding house." Rebecca smiled. "After weeks of captivity with no privacy, solitude is a luxury I welcome. The ranch hands are in the bunkhouse if you need anything, and I'm in the small cabin beyond the barn." He pointed to a distant light. "Don't hesitate to call if you're troubled." "Thank you, Gabriel." She found herself reluctant to say goodnight. "For everything," he nodded, his expression softening in the moonlight. "Sleep well, Rebecca." As she prepared for bed in her new home, Rebecca realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt safe. The terrible journey that had brought her here had ended, and a new path stretched before her. The following Monday, the schoolhouse opened its doors to 20 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. They came on horseback, in wagons, and on foot, the sons and daughters of ranchers, cowboys, and homesteaders, all hungry for the education Rebecca offered. Teaching proved to be exactly what Rebecca needed to heal. Each day brought new challenges and rewards as she worked with her diverse group of students. The older boys were initially resistant, seeing little value in book learning when they already knew how to rope cattle and mend fences. But Rebecca's determination won them over, especially when she incorporated practical applications into her lessons. "When you measure fence posts," she explained to 14-year-old Joseph Miller, "you're using geometry." When you calculate how many cattle can graze on 100 acres without depleting the grass, that's mathematics. The younger children were eager sponges, absorbing everything she offered. 8-year-old Emma Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter, showed a particular aptitude for reading and would often stay after school to help organize the small library of donated books. Most evenings, Rebecca would see Gabriel riding in from checking the far pastures or returning from town on ranch business. Sometimes he would stop by the schoolhouse, ostensibly to check that everything was running smoothly, but their conversations would inevitably extend beyond school matters. "The children speak highly of you," he told her one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps. Even the Dawson boy and his father was certain he'd never take to learning. "They're good children," Rebecca replied, "eager and honest. Teaching them is a joy." As autumn progressed, Rebecca found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. On Sundays, she would play the piano for church services in town, then join the Henderson family for dinner. Weekday evenings were spent preparing lessons or reading by lamplight. Sometimes, she would walk to the main house to help Lily Henderson prepare for her baby's arrival, sewing tiny garments and discussing names. Gabriel remained a constant presence, though Rebecca noticed he kept a careful distance. Their conversations were friendly but rarely personal. Still, she often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, a thoughtful expression on his face. One Saturday in late October, Rebecca was gathering wildflowers for the schoolhouse when she saw Gabriel riding hard toward the ranch, another rider close behind. As they drew nearer, she recognized Sheriff Patton. "Rebecca," Gabriel called out, reining his horse beside her. "Get back to the ranch house now." "What's happening?" she asked, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. Sheriff Patton answered grimly, "Silas Turner escaped during prisoner transfer. He was heard making threats against you and Hunt before he got away." A cold knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. "How long ago?" "2 days," the sheriff replied. "He stole a horse and weapons. Could be anywhere by now, but my guess is he's headed this way." Gabriel dismounted and took Rebecca's arm. "I'm taking you back to the house. Sarah and the others need to be warned." As they walked quickly toward the main building, Rebecca felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The safety she'd begun to take for granted was suddenly precarious. "This is my fault," she said. "I've put everyone in danger." Gabriel's grip on her arm tightened slightly. "No, Turner made his choices. The consequences are his responsibility, not yours." At the ranch house, Sarah Henderson took charge immediately. "Thomas, get the hands together and organize watches. No one rides alone, especially not the women." She turned to Rebecca. "You'll stay here in the main house until Turner is caught." "But my students," Rebecca began. "School's suspended until further notice," Sarah said firmly. "We'll send word to the families." That night, Rebecca lay awake in the guest bedroom of the main house, listening to the wind and the occasional footsteps of men patrolling the property. Despite the precautions, fear had taken root again, poisoning the sense of security she'd worked so hard to build. Near dawn, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. To her surprise, Gabriel was sitting at the kitchen table, his revolver beside him. "You should be resting," she said softly. He looked up, fatigue evident in his eyes. "So should you." Rebecca busied herself with the coffee pot. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Turner's face. I can't believe I've brought this danger to your door, Rebecca." Gabriel's voice drew her attention. "Look at me." She turned, meeting his gaze. "You didn't bring this danger. I did when I interfered with Turner's plans." He ran a hand through his hair. "If anyone should feel responsible, it's me." "You saved me," she protested. "And I'd do it again," he said without hesitation. "But I should have known a man like Turner wouldn't accept defeat so easily." They sat in silence as the coffee brewed, the first light of dawn creeping through the windows. Rebecca studied Gabriel's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "Why did you step forward that day?" she asked suddenly. "In town, when Turner was selling me. You didn't know me. You could have walked away like everyone else." Gabriel was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "During the war, I saw too many people look away from things that were wrong because confronting them was inconvenient or dangerous." His eyes met hers. "I promised myself I wouldn't become one of them." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people who had seen darkness but refused to let it dim their sense of right and wrong. The days that followed were tense. Cowboys rode in pairs, rifles across their saddles. The children remained at home, and Rebecca found herself restless with inactivity. To occupy her hands and mind, she helped in the kitchen, assisted Lily with preparations for the baby, and in the evenings, read aloud to the family from Shakespeare and Dickens. Gabriel was absent much of the time, riding with search parties looking for Turner. Each day, Rebecca watched for his return, relief washing over her when she would spot him riding toward the ranch. A week after Turner's escape, the first snowfall of the season dusted the landscape. Rebecca stood at the window of the main house, watching the soft flakes settle on the ground when she heard horses approaching. Gabriel dismounted in the yard, his expression grim as he conferred with Thomas Henderson. Rebecca hurried outside, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. "What is it? What's happened?" she asked. Gabriel's eyes held a mixture of anger and concern. "Turner was spotted at a line shack 10 miles north. By the time we got there, he was gone, but he'd left a message." He hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. "Tell me," Rebecca insisted. "It was your name, carved into the table, and mine beneath it with a knife driven through." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas Henderson put a steadying hand on her arm. "We've doubled the watches," he assured her. "No one gets within a mile of this ranch without us knowing." That night, a full blizzard descended on the ranch, howling winds driving snow against the windows. The storm forced the search parties to return, and the ranch battened down to wait out the weather. Rebecca found herself sharing the sitting room with Gabriel, both of them unable to sleep despite the late hour. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "The storm works in our favor," Gabriel said, breaking the silence. "Turner can't move easily in this weather either." Rebecca nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. "I keep thinking about what happens after he's caught. Will I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if there's another Turner out there?" "No," Gabriel said firmly. "You can't live that way, trust me, I know." Something in his tone made Rebecca look at him more carefully. "You've had your own Turners." It wasn't a question, but Gabriel answered anyway. "After the war, I testified against a group of men who were profiteering from both sides. They had connections, money, made my life difficult for a while." "Is that why you came west?" He nodded. "Partly, but I also needed open spaces after the war. Too many men packed too close together for too long." Rebecca understood. She too had felt confined in Boston after her mother's death, the social obligations and expectations closing in like walls. "What about you?" Gabriel asked. "Why were you leaving Boston? Besides your father's position in San Francisco." Rebecca was silent for a moment, considering how much to share. "After my mother died, my father's cousin Vernon began to show interest in me. He was a widower, 20 years my senior and wealthy enough that my father couldn't easily refuse him." She stared into the fire. "The position in San Francisco was as much escape as opportunity." "And now," Gabriel's voice was soft, "what do you want now?" Rebecca looked up, meeting his gaze across the dimly lit room. "Now I want to teach children who value education. I want to play the piano on Sundays and help Lily with her baby. I want to watch the seasons change in this wild, beautiful place." She hesitated. "I want to stop being afraid." "You will," Gabriel said with quiet certainty. "You're stronger than you know, Rebecca." The blizzard raged for 3 days, effectively halting all movement in the region. When it finally cleared, the landscape was transformed pristine white stretching to the horizon, trees laden with snow, icicles hanging from the eaves. Rebecca stood on the porch of the main house, breathing in the clean, cold air when Gabriel approached. He was dressed for riding, his rifle in its scabbard. "Sheriff Patton's gathered a posse," he explained. "With the snow, we should be able to track Turner if he's moved during the storm." "Be careful," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern. Gabriel's expression softened. "Always am." As he mounted his horse, Rebecca called out, "Gabriel," he turned back, waiting, "come back safely." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. He nodded once, then rode out with the other men, their figures growing smaller against the vast white landscape. With the men gone, the ranch seemed eerily quiet. Sarah Henderson kept everyone busy with indoor tasks, mending harnesses, taking inventory of supplies, preparing preserved foods for the winter ahead. Rebecca helped where she could, but found herself constantly drawn to the windows, searching the horizon. Late in the afternoon, as the early winter darkness began to fall, Rebecca was in the kitchen with Sarah and Lily when they heard a horse approaching. A single rider coming fast. "That's not the posse," Sarah said, moving to the window. Her expression changed immediately. "Get the guns." Rebecca's heart raced as she followed Sarah's instructions, retrieving the loaded shotgun from its place by the door. Through the window, she could see a lone rider approaching the house. Even at a distance, there was something familiar in his silhouette that made her blood run cold. "It's Turner," she whispered. Sarah's voice was steady. "Lily, go upstairs and lock yourself in the bedroom. Rebecca, take position at the west window. I'll cover the front door." As Lily hurried upstairs, Sarah turned to Rebecca. "Can you shoot?" Rebecca shook her head. "I never learned." "Point and squeeze the trigger," Sarah said grimly. "Aim for the center of his body. Don't hesitate." Outside, Turner had reached the yard. He dismounted, a rifle in his hands, and called out, "I know you're in there, Boston lady. Come out and face me." Sarah motioned for Rebecca to stay silent and hidden. Through the window, Rebecca could see Turner clearly now, his face leaner than before, his beard wild, but his eyes still holding that same cruel gleam. "Your cowboy ain't here to save you now," Turner shouted. "But don't worry, I'll wait for him. Want him to watch when I collect what's mine." Rebecca felt a surge of anger cutting through her fear. This man had taken so much from her, already her father, her security, weeks of her life. She refused to let him take more. "I was never yours to collect," she called back, "and I don't need anyone to save me." Turner's head whipped toward her voice and he raised his rifle. "There you are." Before he could fire, a shot rang out from somewhere to the left of the house. Turner staggered, dropping his rifle as he clutched his shoulder. From behind the barn emerged one of the ranch hands who had stayed behind, his rifle trained on the wounded man. "Next one goes through your head," the cowboy warned. "Drop to your knees, hands where I can see them." Turner, bleeding but still defiant, reached for his fallen rifle. Another shot kicked up snow inches from his hand, stopping him. "That was your last warning," the cowboy said, slowly, with hatred burning in his eyes. Turner sank to his knees in the snow. Sarah emerged from the house, shotgun trained steadily on him, while the cowboy approached cautiously to bind Turner's hands. Rebecca watched from the doorway, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief, certainly, but also a strange sense of anticlimax. The monster who had haunted her dreams was just a man after all, wounded, aging, and ultimately powerless. By the time Gabriel and the posse returned, Turner was secured in the ranch's storage cellar. Sheriff Patton took him into custody immediately, promising that this time there would be no escape. "Judge Harrison arrives next week," the sheriff told Gabriel. "Turner will stand trial for kidnapping, attempted murder, and escape. With the evidence we have and the witnesses against him, he'll hang for certain." That night, the ranch celebrated with a special dinner, relief making everyone more talkative and animated than usual. Only Rebecca remained quiet, processing the day's events and her own reactions to them. After dinner, she slipped outside, needing fresh air and solitude. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the snow-covered landscape. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Gabriel approaching. "You should wear a coat," he said, draping his own around her shoulders. "Night air is bitter after a storm." The coat held his warmth and scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. Rebecca pulled it closer around herself. "Thank you, not just for the coat." Gabriel stood beside her, looking out at the starlit snow. "Sarah told me what happened." "Said you found your courage today." "Not found," Rebecca corrected. "Remembered." She turned to face him. "When Turner appeared, I was terrified, but then I realized I've already survived the worst he could do to me. I refused to let him make me a victim again." Gabriel's eyes held hers, something like pride in his expression. "You never were a victim, Rebecca, a survivor from the start." The distinction mattered, she realized. Victim was passive, defined by what was done to you. Survivor was active, defined by your response to it. "What happens now?" She asked softly. "Turner goes to trial, you testify if you're willing. After that," he hesitated. "After that, life continues, school reopens, spring comes eventually. And us?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Gabriel went still, his expression impossible to read in the moonlight. "What do you want there to be?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "I want honesty between us, Gabriel. These past months, since the day you stopped Turner in town, something has been growing between us. I feel it. I think you do too." He didn't deny it. "I do, but your life was upended, Rebecca. You're still finding your footing. I didn't want to complicate things." "Life is complicated," she said simply. "Denying what we feel doesn't simplify it." Gabriel lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "I've watched you rebuild your life with such courage, teaching those children, becoming part of this community. You deserve a future unburdened by the past." "And you think you're a burden?" she asked, understanding dawning. "Because of your past, the war." "I carry things with me," he said quietly. "Things I can't change or fix." "So do I," Rebecca replied. "My father's death, those weeks in captivity. But carrying them alone is harder than sharing the weight." She placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "I'm not asking for promises, Gabriel, just honesty and perhaps permission to see where this path leads." For a moment he was utterly still. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, a question more than a declaration. Rebecca answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you played the piano in the schoolhouse." Rebecca smiled. "I've wanted you to since the day you told Turner I was no one's property." His arms tightened around her. "You never were, you never will be." In that moment, surrounded by the vast silence of the snow-covered ranch, Rebecca felt the last shadows of her captivity finally recede. What remained was the woman she had become, stronger, wiser, and now, no longer alone. The trial of Silas Turner took place in early December, with Judge Harrison presiding in the Hollow Creek Town Hall. The building was packed with spectators as Rebecca took the stand to testify about her kidnapping and the attempted sale. "Miss Ellington," the prosecutor asked, "can you identify the man who held you captive and attempted to sell you?" Rebecca's voice was steady as she pointed to Turner. "That man, Silas Turner." Throughout her testimony, Rebecca kept her gaze level, her voice clear. She could feel Gabriel's supportive presence from where he sat near the front of the room. When asked about the day of the auction, she described how Gabriel had intervened, refusing to accept the sale of another human being. "Mr. Hunt said I was no one's property," she recalled. "That selling human beings was wrong, regardless of what Turner claimed." Turner's defense was weak claims that he had found Rebecca abandoned on the trail and was merely trying to find her a home. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with a guilty verdict on all charges. Judge Harrison's sentence was unequivocal. Silas Turner, for the crimes of kidnapping, attempted human trafficking, escape from lawful custody, and attempted murder, I hereby sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. As Turner was led away in chains, Rebecca felt not satisfaction but a somber sense of closure. No punishment could bring back her father or erase what she had endured, but justice had been served as well as it could be. Outside the courthouse, Gabriel waited for her. "You did well in there," he said, taking her hand. "It's over now." Rebecca nodded, squeezing his fingers. "Yes, finally." The execution was scheduled for the following week, but Rebecca chose not to attend. Instead, she reopened the schoolhouse, welcoming her students back with a renewed sense of purpose. Life at the Henderson Ranch settled into a new pattern as winter deepened. School continued despite occasional snow days. On Sundays, Rebecca played the piano for church services, her repertoire expanding beyond hymns to include classical pieces that brought a touch of culture to the frontier community. Her relationship with Gabriel grew slowly but steadily. He would often join her for dinner in her small quarters by the schoolhouse, bringing books they would discuss long into the evening. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, Rebecca grading papers while Gabriel repaired tack or cleaned his guns. Christmas brought a special joy to the ranch. The main house was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and everyone gathered for a feast on Christmas Eve. Rebecca played carols on the piano while the children sang along, their faces bright with excitement. Gabriel presented Rebecca with a gift, a delicate silver locket containing a small photograph of her father that he had somehow retrieved from her lost belongings. "How did you find this?" she asked, tears filling her eyes as she opened the locket. "Sheriff Patton located some of your trunks at a trading post near where your stagecoach was attacked," Gabriel explained. "Most items were gone, but this was hidden in a false bottom of your jewelry box." Rebecca fastened the locket around her neck, deeply moved by Gabriel's thoughtfulness. Her gift to him was simply a hand-knitted scarf and a copy of Thoreau's Walden that she had sent away to Denver for. "For a man who appreciates open spaces," she said as he unwrapped it. As they stood together near the Christmas tree, Gabriel took her hand. "I have something else for you," he said quietly. "Not exactly a gift, more of a question." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What is it?" "Spring will be here before we know it," he began, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing uncertainty. "I've been offered a parcel of land adjoining the Henderson property. Good grazing land with a creek running through it." "You're leaving the ranch?" Rebecca asked, dismayed at the thought. Gabriel shook his head. "Not leaving, expanding. James Henderson left provisions in his will that his foreman should have the opportunity to build something of his own alongside the main ranch." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been saving to stock it with cattle, could build a proper house by summer." Rebecca waited, sensing there was more. "What I'm trying to say, not very well," Gabriel continued, "is that I'm building a future here, and I'd like you to be part of it if you want to be." "Gabriel Hunt," Rebecca said, a smile spreading across her face, "are you asking me to marry you?" He looked relieved that she had understood his roundabout proposal. "I am. Though I'd understand if you want more time," or if Rebecca silenced him with a kiss, heedless of the other guests in the room. When they parted, both slightly breathless, she said, "Yes. My answer is yes." A cheer went up from the gathering. Apparently, their conversation had not been as private as they'd thought. Sarah Henderson approached with a knowing smile. "About time," she said, patting Gabriel's arm. "I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar to get results." The winter months passed in a flurry of preparations. Rebecca continued teaching while helping plan their future home. Gabriel worked with ranch hands to clear the land and begin construction when weather permitted. Their wedding was set for April, when the wildflowers would begin to bloom across the prairie. On a clear February day, Gabriel took Rebecca to see the progress on their land. The ride was invigorating, the air crisp but with hints of the coming spring. As they crested a low hill, Gabriel reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to where foundation stones had been laid for a modest house beside the creek. Upstream, a small orchard had been planted. "What do you think?" Rebecca took in the scene, the framework of their future home against the backdrop of rolling hills, the distant mountains still snow-capped, the endless sky above. It was nothing like the life she had planned in Boston or San Francisco, yet it felt exactly right. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it completely. Gabriel helped her down from her horse, and they walked the property together, discussing where the garden would go, how the interior of the house would be arranged, whether they should add a small schoolroom for when Rebecca eventually had students come to the house during winter months. "And here," Gabriel said, leading her to a slight rise overlooking the creek, "is where I thought we might someday build a porch for sitting on summer evenings, watching our children play." The casual mention of children, their children, made Rebecca's heart swell with emotion. She had lost so much, had her life violently redirected, yet somehow had found her way to this moment, to this man, to this future that now seemed more right than the one she had originally planned. "I love you," she said, the words coming naturally, though it was the first time she had spoken them aloud to him. "I think I have since the moment you said I was no one's property." Gabriel turned to her, his eyes reflecting the clear blue of the winter sky. "And I've loved you since I saw you stand up to that mob outside the jail. You could have demanded vengeance, but you chose justice instead." He took her hands in his. "You're the strongest person I know, Rebecca Ellington. Soon to be Rebecca Hunt," she reminded him with a smile. Their April wedding was a community affair, with seemingly everyone from the ranch and Hollow Creek in attendance. The ceremony took place in the small church where Rebecca played the piano each Sunday, with Sheriff Patton giving the bride away and Sarah Henderson arranging everything from flowers to the wedding feast. Rebecca wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with her mother's pearls and the locket containing her father's photograph. Gabriel, unaccustomed to formal wear, nonetheless cut a handsome figure in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As they spoke their vows, Rebecca felt the presence of those absent her parents who would never meet the man she had chosen, Gabriel's family back east who had not been able to travel for the wedding. But the church was filled with their new family, the community that had embraced them both. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Gabriel's kiss was tender but held a promise of the future they would build together, a future neither of them could have imagined on that dusty street in Hollow Creek less than a year ago. The celebration continued well into the evening at the Henderson Ranch, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. As night fell, lanterns were lit in the yard, casting a golden glow over the festivities. During a quiet moment, Rebecca found herself standing beside Sarah Henderson, watching Gabriel dance with Emma, the little girl laughing as he twirled her around. "He's a good man," Sarah said, following Rebecca's gaze. "James always said Gabriel had the makings of something special if he could just put down roots somewhere." "I think we both needed to find where we belonged," Rebecca replied. "It just happened to be the same place." The house was completed by early summer, a sturdy structure of timber and stone with large windows that captured light and views of the surrounding landscape. Rebecca filled it with a careful mix of practical frontier furnishings and a few touches of the Eastern refinement she had grown up with: curtains of fine cotton, a set of china that had been a wedding gift from Mrs. Henderson, books lining shelves Gabriel had built. Their wedding night had been a revelation, Gabriel's tenderness belying his strength, his patience allowing Rebecca to overcome her lingering fears from captivity. In his arms, she discovered a passion that matched her own, a physical expression of the deep bond they had formed through shared hardship and respect. By autumn, Rebecca had news to share. She found Gabriel in the small stable behind their house, checking the hooves of his favorite horse. "I've been to see Dr. Wilson in town," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Gabriel straightened immediately, concern in his eyes. "Are you unwell?" "Quite the opposite." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Gabriel, in spring." The joy that transformed his face was something Rebecca knew she would remember forever. He lifted her gently, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. Our child," she agreed, "the first of our family." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Gabriel's hand resting protectively over her abdomen, Rebecca thought about the strange, difficult journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was thinking about fate," she answered. "How the worst moment of my life eventually led me to the best." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "I don't know if it was fate," he said finally. "I prefer to think it was choices. Turner chose cruelty. You chose courage, I chose to stand up for what was right." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And then we both chose each other." "I like that better," Rebecca agreed. "Fate seems too passive, as if we had no say in the matter." "You've never been passive a day in your life, Rebecca Hunt," Gabriel said with a smile in his voice. "Not even when you were in chains." She turned in his arms to face him. "Neither have you, that's why we fit." The baby, a daughter they named Grace Sarah Hunt, was born on a bright April morning with Mrs. Henderson acting as midwife and Gabriel pacing nervously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed in, he approached the bed with such reverence that Rebecca laughed despite her exhaustion. "She won't break," she assured him as he carefully took his daughter in his arms. "She's stronger than she looks." "Like her mother," Gabriel murmured, awe in his expression as he studied the tiny face. Little Grace thrived in the frontier home, growing from a solemn-eyed infant to a curious toddler who followed her father around the small ranch and sat in her mother's lap during piano lessons. Rebecca continued to teach at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, bringing Grace with her. The other children adored the little girl, competing for the chance to entertain her while their teacher conducted lessons. By the time Grace was 3, the Hunt Ranch had prospered. Gabriel's careful management had grown their herd to a respectable size, and Rebecca's garden produced enough vegetables to share with neighbors during harvest. They had added 2 rooms to the house and planted more trees along the creek. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch Gabriel had built, watching the sunset paint the western sky while Grace chased fireflies in the yard. These were the moments Rebecca cherished most, simple, peaceful times that had seemed impossible during those dark days of captivity. "I received a letter from Boston today," she told Gabriel one such evening. "My father's cousin Vernon has died. Apparently he left me a small inheritance despite our differences." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "The same cousin who wanted to marry you," Rebecca nodded. "The very same. His housekeeper wrote that he spoke of me often, expressing regret for his presumption." She shook her head, still surprised. "The inheritance isn't large, but enough to expand the schoolhouse in town, maybe add a proper library." Gabriel watched their daughter playing nearby. "Would you ever want to visit Boston, show Grace where you came from?" Rebecca considered this. "Someday, perhaps, when she's older, but this is home now." She reached for his hand. "This is where I belong." Later that night, after Grace was asleep, Rebecca found Gabriel standing by the window, looking out at the moon-silvered landscape. "What are you thinking about, husband?" she asked, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "How lucky I am," he answered simply, covering her hands with his. "That day in town when Turner had you on that auction block, I could have ridden past, almost did." "But you didn't," Rebecca reminded him. "You stopped, you spoke up." He turned to face her. "Best decision of my life, mine too," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As their kiss deepened, Rebecca marveled again at how completely her life had transformed. From the terror of captivity to this profound sense of safety and belonging, from being treated as property to being cherished as a partner and equal, Gabriel had been right that day in Hollow Creek. She was no one's property. She was her own woman who had chosen this life, this love, this future stretching out before them like the vast western horizon full of promise, challenge, and boundless possibility. Years later, when Grace was joined by a brother named James and the Hunt Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory, Rebecca would sometimes take out the journal Mrs. Henderson had given her and write about her journey. Not just the harrowing parts, though she never forgot those, but the unexpected joy she had found afterward. From the darkest moments come the brightest dawns, she wrote on the 10th anniversary of her arrival in Hollow Creek. I was once sold like a mare, but found a man who saw me as no one's property but my own. Together, we built something neither of us could have created alone: a family, a home, a life worth every hardship that brought us to each other. And in the margin, in Gabriel's strong handwriting, was added, "The best purchases are those made with the heart, not with coin. I gave nothing for you, Rebecca, but gained everything in return."